This is live from New Delhi. You're watching DD India, India's voice to the world, and I'm Sakal Bhatt. This is special broadcast on DD India. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi in Ukraine. Prime Minister Modi in Ukraine, our special broadcast. In a while from now, India's Prime Minister Modi is scheduled to hold talks with Ukrainian President Zelensky in Kyiv. And remember, this is the first ever visit by an Indian Prime Minister to Ukraine. We will be analysing the significance of Prime Minister Modi's Kyiv visit, the optics of it, the broader deliverables and overall agenda, as well as the strategic interests for both sides are also concerned. In fact, we will be joined by a former Indian envoy to Ukraine in our Delhi studios and also some subject experts, including our reporters, joining us on this special broadcast. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi arrived in Kyiv earlier today on a day-long visit to Ukraine, and this is the first ever visit by an Indian Prime Minister, as we just mentioned, to Ukraine since the establishment of diplomatic relations between the two countries. Prime Minister Modi was accorded with a warm welcome upon his arrival in Kyiv. First trip by an Indian Prime Minister to Ukraine, making it very, very significant since Kyiv gained independence from the Soviet Union in 1991. And also, the Indian community accorded a very, very warm welcome upon his arrival. Those are the visuals on your screen. The Prime Minister arrived in Kyiv from Poland on board a Rail Force One train in the second and final leg of his two-nation trip. Indian diaspora lining up to accord warm welcome to Indian Prime Minister earlier today in Kyiv. The Prime Minister will be holding one-on-one and delegation-level talks with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, and the conversation is largely to focus upon strengthening bilateral cooperation between the two sides, as well as sharing perspectives on peaceful resolution of the ongoing Ukraine conflict. In fact, in his departure statement ahead of the visit, Prime Minister Modi said that he is visiting Ukraine at the invitation of President Volodymyr Zelensky. Prime Minister Modi said that he looked forward to the opportunity to build upon earlier conversations with President Zelensky on strengthening bilateral cooperation and share perspectives on peaceful resolution of the ongoing Ukraine conflict. As a friend and partner, India hopes for an early return of peace and stability in the region. Prime Minister also said that he was confident that the visit will serve as a natural continuation of extensive contacts with the two countries and also help create the foundation for stronger and more vibrant relationship in the years ahead as far as India and Ukraine is concerned. Ahead of his visit to Ukraine, Prime Minister Modi also said that India firmly believes that no problem can be solved on the battlefield and that the ongoing conflicts in Ukraine and West Asia are a matter of deep concern for all of us. Prime Minister Modi made the remarks after holding talks with Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk in Warsaw on Thursday.
यूक्रेन और पश्चिम एशिया में चल रहे संघर्ष हम सभी के लिए गहरी चिंता का विषय है। भारत का यह दृढ़ विश्वास है कि किसी भी समस्या का समाधान रणभूमि में नहीं हो सकता।
Prime Minister Modi told the media that India is ready to extend all possible cooperation for the restoration of peace and stability in the region, and that dialogue and diplomacy is the way forward to restore peace.
किसी भी संकट में मासूम लोगों की जान की हानि पूरी मानवता के लिए सबसे बड़ी चुनौती बन गई है। हम शांति और स्थिरता की जल्द से जल्द बहाली के लिए डायलॉग और डिप्लोमेसी का समर्थन करते हैं।
I'm being joined by DD India's Jessica Taneja from our newsroom. She's tracking the story very, very closely. Jessica, to begin with, run us through the significance of Prime Minister Modi's Kyiv visit, specifically the intent and the timings of it, and what makes this very important for the Ukrainian side as well.
Well, it certainly does, Sakal, at this point. If you go by the numbers, the Ukrainians in the next 10 years would need more than $750 billion for post-war reconstruction efforts. And with that number in mind, of course, it will need help from all quarters. Not that India would independently be able to help build post-war Ukraine, but yes, it would make a significant contribution as it has in the past as well. And in January this year, India sent its 14th consignment of supplies to Ukraine that included essential medicines and generators so that they could be used in various schools for students in Ukraine and Ukrainian children to continue studying. So India has been making a significant contribution when it comes to the ongoing conflict and how to provide that necessary aid. But beyond the aid mechanism and the post-war construction efforts, India has also looked at a larger role where it doesn't necessarily look to be the direct mediator, but yes, a country with absolute heft which can drive a resolution given that its understanding and relationship with Russia and how it has evolved over the years, with India being able to balance that, and of course looking at how it deals with the Western partners to be able to sort of drive that mediation, if not be at the center of it. But India continues to reiterate that Russia has to be part of the conversation.
Yes, and Russia being the part of the conversation, Ukraine also being the part of the conversation, and this comes on the invitation by the President Zelensky. Also, in a way, signals, Jessica, would you agree, from the Indian side, the shift to the multi-alignment in the multipolar world, considering what is happening in Europe?
Well, questions have been raised in the past about India's, complete adherence to its foreign policy of strategic autonomy, and India has defended that to an extent where it says that it is capable of maintaining good relationships with all without having too many enemies and not making everything about a zero-sum game. And this certainly is not one, and this has been the official line as well. Of course, 1 month ago there was a visit by the Prime Minister to Russia, but the one in Ukraine takes more focus in a sense where it's not just only about balance but also trying to find a ground where things can be stabilized for the greater good, not just for the European theatre of war at this point, but the world simply cannot afford two simmering conflicts, one that goes on in West Asia and the one that now continues in Russia, Ukraine, where you see the Ukrainians have occupied the Kursk territory in Russia, about 1,600 square kilometers of that, and while the Russians continue to occupy the eastern territory of Ukraine, this battle and in the way it is dragging is certainly not helping stabilize anything, let alone the two countries and the global affairs at large.
Also, if you could just take us through the engagements of Prime Minister Modi, and especially the bilaterals that both sides are looking at, specific focus on restoring trade ties.
That's correct. The trade ties between the two currently stand at $2.3 billion, and that is something that could see some momentum in the future, looking at how various sectors and cooperation can be done. Specifically in the energy sector, one would recall, of course, India and Ukraine have had bilateral trade in the past as well when it comes to grain and also oil, and seed oil in particular, and India has been supplying essential medicines. So of course the export and import has been fairly marginal at this point, but this visit aims to strengthen that and build on that momentum and look at Ukraine as a partner in a sense where it can utilize India's help to the extent where the kind of post-war construction efforts it is looking at.
Okay, so we are getting these visuals earlier today, Prime Minister Modi paying floral tributes at the statue of Mahatma Gandhi, father of the nation, in Kyiv. And I also take this opportunity as we stay with these visuals of Prime Minister paying homage at Gandhi statue in Kyiv. We are joined by former ambassador India's former ambassador to Ukraine, Ambassador Soni, in our studio with us. Here, sir, we'll stay with these visuals. Warm welcome and accorded there by the Indians. It's very heartening to see the number of Indians there in Kyiv, and they've come out in large numbers. Only reiterates that there has been a relationship, although maybe not very active prior Modi regime, but the way our government has engaged with Ukraine as well as Russia, but specifically sticking to the timings of this visit as we stay with these visuals.
Well, let me first of all say that Ukraine has been special for us, various reasons. I mean, I was there quite some time back, but even at that time, the relations were a little on the cool for various political reasons, which I can...
I'll just interrupt you here for a brief, because I think this is also very important in terms of symbolism. Prime Minister Modi paying homage to Mahatma Gandhi, who said that my life is my message of peace and cooperation for the world peace, good for the world peace. So I think India is sending a strong message.
It's a strong message because I think first of all, India is very popular in that country. An average Ukrainian loves India and everything connected with India. Indian culture, Indian yoga, dancing, dance forms, all kind of things are there. Only thing is that it has not been fully utilized for various reasons. But now is the time when Ukraine needs some help. I'm not just talking about the political help, but also reconstruction. When I stepped in, I found that there is a proposal for a program for reconstruction, because there will be a lot of work that will be needed. There is so much of destruction and annihilation that has taken place. There are a lot of hospital buildings, etc. have been. So India would be in a position to come forward and help them in doing that. We are already doing a lot of humanitarian assistance to them. We have been sending them.
Especially at the outbreak of the conflict.
Absolutely. The important thing is that in terms of pharmaceuticals, there are a lot of pharmaceutical companies, and they are the ones who have donated, gifted a lot of medicines to them, running into millions of dollars. But more importantly, there is also the Jaipur foot. I don't know whether you know, there is a lot of people who lost their limbs because of the destruction that was caused by the bombing by the Russians. So they needed some kind of a rehabilitation program for that. And so there is this company, Jaipur Foot, which has gone there.
Yes. And we will continue this conversation. We will also welcome Professor Swaran Singh, Foreign Affairs expert, joining us on the show. But before that, let me quickly once again go across to Jessica from Newsroom, who continues to be with us. So there's a larger message here as we stay with these visuals. We were talking about Prime Minister's engagements today in Kyiv, Jessica.
That's correct. After the paying homage at the Mahatma Gandhi statue, the Prime Minister, of course, will meet the Ukrainian President at his official residence at the palace, the Mariinsky Palace, later. And after that, we're expecting he would interact with students as well, students who are learning to speak Hindi. And if you'd recall, there were a lot of Indian students, medical students who were present in Ukraine, who had, of course, left the country once the war ravaged. And at this point, the Prime Minister's visit, though, comes at a very short and a very brief period to cover lots of events. But of course, the event with the community, always part of his itinerary. And with that, his trip comes to a wrap in just few hours, Sakal. Limited interactions, but making it very effective and definitely giving out a message that India knows how to balance its ties and will continue to gain interest wherever it can help either energize a country's economy or perhaps build it once it's ravaged by war.
We will also, in fact, let's go across to Professor Swaran Singh, Foreign Affairs expert, joining us on the show. Jessica, requesting you to stay with us as we continue to have Ambassador Vidya Bhushan Soni in our Delhi studios. Professor Singh, if you could hear me, sir, Prime Minister Modi's visuals up on air paying tributes to Gandhi, father of the nation, Mahatma Gandhi's statue. Prime Minister gave a very strong message in Russia about peace, the same message in Poland, and now in Ukraine. I think this is the same message, especially floral tributes at the bust of Mahatma Gandhi, who said and meant throughout his life that my life is my message.
Thank you, Sakal, for having me on your program today. I think let me quickly say things that India has already achieved by this visit before we talk of what happens at the international level. I heard Ambassador Soni mentioning that most Ukrainians love India and they love Indians. Now, about 23,000 Indians, we were able to bring them out during the moment war started in February of 2022. But there are about another 2,500 who have permanently settled, got married, have business there. Now, those Indians who Ukrainians loved had become target of criticism over the last 2.5 years. They were facing certain amount of apathy or even anger. The first thing that Prime Minister's visit has already achieved is now a great relief to those Indians, about 2,500 there doing business, which is an indication of India at the apex level, highest level, engaging Ukraine at the highest level as well. And that will bring great relief. And you see the enthusiasm of Indian community is partly driven by that.
Absolutely.
Second thing that India has already achieved are these symbolic pictures that are on your screen about Indian Prime Minister paying floral tribute to Father of the Nation, Mahatma Gandhi, who himself is a messenger of peace or apostle of peace. That underlines how Indian Prime Minister today is increasingly seen as a global leader, particularly leader of the global South, and has responsibilities and expectations from around the world. If there is a problem that the whole world is suffering from, like Ukraine war for the last 2.5 years, Indian Prime Minister has to be at the center stage in middle of epic center of that crisis. And the Moscow visit, his today being in Kiev, is a second clear underlining of India standing up and taking that challenge and contributing to that process of peace building.
You see, sir, Mahatma Gandhi has been a global ambassador for India for peace. And I think this is so well timed. But the fact that this visit is also, many experts have been talking about it, seeing it from the prism of this being a balancing act. I mean, the world may interpret it the way they want to, but the fact remains that the Indian Prime Minister, one of the very few leaders who has positively engaged with Russia and appealed for peace, diplomacy, dialogue, did the same in Austria and did the same in Poland and now in Ukraine on the invitation of the Ukraine's top leadership. I think for Ukraine, this is more important than anything else.
Yes, indeed, there is a lot of speculations about why this visit is taking place, and a lot of commentators are trying to link it to the anger that was shown by Western nations, by President Zelensky, by American President, American Secretary of State, their ambassador in New Delhi. But I don't think that is the reason this visit is taking place. India is constantly pursuing strategic autonomy, and it was only anticipated that after visit to Moscow, and remember, visit to Moscow happened after maximum delay possible. There is a seamless summit meeting that takes place for last quarter of a century between Russia and India. After December of 2021, Indian Prime Minister was supposed to go to Moscow. He did not go in 2022. He did not go in 2023. Did not go till half year of this year. And therefore, there was a long wait before Indian Prime Minister decided to go to Moscow. And that has to be appreciated as a signal of India trying to be proactively neutral in this conflict, trying to contribute as much as possible in a piecemeal, without advertising and grandstanding, as your reporter just mentioned.
Yes.
India has constantly been providing humanitarian assistance. So there is no point in throwing up another 13-point program that will be demolished by either one or the other side. Therefore, I think it's a very interesting piecemeal, imperceptive, behind the curtain, gradual effort to see where India can contribute. And I think that is a very effective approach that is being applied. And in that sense, I'm looking forward to Prime Minister's statement coming from Kiev, giving a little more specific direction of where India stands in contributions that India wishes to make.
Okay.
I heard Ambassador Soni say that we're already thinking about reconstruction in Ministry of External Affairs. So India has done groundwork, has done cost-benefit analysis, and we are hoping something good is going to come out of this visit.
Yes. Professor Swansingh, stay with us. And I think we have Jessica also. Ambassador Soni, if you could just put the whole gamut of India-Ukraine relationship in perspective. But the fact that New Delhi has had ties with Russia, it has ties with Ukraine, which it intends to take to next level. But these ties are independent of each other. And this trip is not just all about peace and reconciliation. There is much more to it. When PM was in Russia, you had the West and the NATO watching very closely. Now you have Prime Minister in Ukraine, you have US and Russia again watching it very closely. How do you see this building up?
Well, let me first of all clarify that this much is made out about balancing. I do not think that's the right way to approach. India's approach is not, why should it be showing you to the world is balanced? It is already balanced. But what India has tried to show is we are not going there as a mediator. Please be very clear in your mind.
Very clear on that, yes.
We are facilitator. I think what has happened during the last few years, last 2 years or so between in the hostilities between the two nations is that there is no common ground. They are not even meeting directly, talking to each other. There are certain conditionalities which are put by both sides, which does not bring them face to face. I mean, Ukraine organized a conference in Switzerland, as you know, but Russia was not invited. So what's the purpose of having this kind of a effort when the concerned side is not even there? So my point is that India is trying to see in what manner we can bring the two warring parties to talking terms. There is nothing happening on that, specifically talking on that. So India is trying to give confidence because Prime Minister Modi had been to Russia and so he has talked about that, what are the sensitivities of the Russians. Now he is going to convey that whatever the Russian President Putin has mentioned to him. But he would also like to clarify all the doubts, if there are any, in Zelensky's mind or in Ukrainian mind, that the only way forward, and that has been repeated by Prime Minister so many times, that the only way forward is to talk and not to indulge in rhetoric or into military action. Peace can come and long-term relationship has to be put into view, and that can come only if you sit down, talk, specific term, if there are difficulties, if there are roadblocks, how to remove them, can we be of any assistance, can we come forward and give you certain advice on that manner, because India is in a position to render that advice. It has been the spokesperson for the underdogs all along. It has been the power which has helped a lot of countries in the south.
Yes.
I mean,
so this global south outreach from Ukrainians, point of view, Jessica, coming to you, they really want to engage more with India as the leader of the global south, and this is something you could talk about. It is all about Prime Minister Modi's global standing also, because he being one of the few leaders who is engaged with both Russia as well as Ukraine recently.
Well, in a sense, yes. And if you look at his engagements in the past, there has been focus on the global south, as you pointed out, not just to India's G20 presidency, but otherwise as well. But looking at the current theatre that you know in your current neighborhood is, of course, one thing to mull on, because at this point, for India strategically as well, the kind of alternate axis power that is building up, which is, in Russia-China closeness, which has now led to a no limits friendship over the years, is if not threatening, but of course point of concern for India and its security architecture, and not just for just for Asia, but in the long run as well, and how it would affect the entire Indo-Pacific region. And that perhaps is also one thing that India has kept in mind and planned its strategies and foreign policy all along. But at this point, this particular visit does not mean to counter that, but of course signals that India can add more to this visit than what many observers and commentators around the world have looked at. Global South, of course, being one of those. But if this particular security architecture is threatened with the Russia, China, and of course then being dwelling on a close friendship between North Korea and Iran, that particular nexus also sort of doesn't help at all. And India would know what it needs to do when a certain situation like that comes at its doorstep.
Okay, Jessica, before we leave you, if you could just once again quickly go through the engagements, take us through the engagements of the Prime Minister today in Ukraine.
Well, the Prime Minister just were paying homage at the Gandhi Memorial that you just saw a few moments ago, Sakal. And after that, as I pointed out earlier, he will be meeting the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky later in about an hour or so, as we're expecting at his official residence, which is the Mariinsky Palace. After that, we can expect the bilateral talks to take place, and of course a statement as well. We're also given to understand that there could be a press briefing from the Ministry of External Affairs later in the afternoon, where details of what was discussed and how and what is being done to take this bilateral relationship forward will be mentioned to the press and to the world at large. So let's wait for that and see the kind of engagements that the two sides saw today.
And the statements that will come out. Jessica Taneja of DD India, thank you very much as of now for joining us live from Newsroom. Thank you. Well, Prime Minister Modi's visit to Ukraine comes nearly 6 weeks after his high-profile trip to Moscow. Before we continue with the discussion, we would also let's play out the visuals earlier today when Prime Minister arrived in Kyiv via train. Prime Minister Modi has always made a very strong appeal for peace, whether it is in Poland or Russia and again in Ukraine. As we watch this visit of Prime Minister in Ukraine very, very keenly and closely. And Professor Swaran Singh continues to be with us, foreign affairs expert, as we continue to have Ambassador Vidyabhushan Soniji, former Indian ambassador to Ukraine, in our Delhi studio. Professor Swaran Singh, over to you, a bit of a perspective in this being in the continuation of the conversations between two sides. They've met on the sidelines of the G7 and the kind of statements that have come from Ukraine ahead of Prime Minister Modi's touchdown in Kyiv. Ukraine attaching tremendous amount of significance to Prime Minister Modi's visit at this juncture. Okay, so here is the visual, which is very historic and unprecedented in many ways. Ambassador Soni, would you agree? Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky there with the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. The body language, would you like to talk about that? Very, very important. Today, remember, there's going to be a very important bilateral between the two sides. Prime Minister Modi earlier paid floral tributes at the Gandhi bust. And here, Ukrainian President greeting Prime Minister Modi with a warm hug. And so,
well, let me first of all take you back to my days in Ukraine, which was some time back. Ever since independence of Ukraine in 1991, there has been only 2 visits at the heads of state level, from our side first, and then of course the Ukrainian president, the then Ukrainian president also came. But at the prime minister's level, there has not been a single visit. So it's long overdue, and it's important that this visit took place, but not just for the sake of what is happening in the Ukrainian crisis, but on bilateral front also. Ukraine has been...
I think it's a memorial of a 5-month... I'm sorry, sir, I'm interrupting you here.
Please,
Can we go back to those visuals? Because this is very important for us to understand the larger message here. We are talking about war-torn Kyiv.
Absolutely.
And here you can see Prime Minister Modi with folded hands paying homage, and I think there is that visual where, yeah, here it is. I think it's some sort of a memorial of a May 2022 as a result of shelling in Kharkiv. 5-month-old child died.
No, that was heart-rending. How could any person of the humanity be doing all that kind of a thing? You may have a problem, but sort it out on the battlefield, between the two armies. But when you start attacking civilian targets, innocent people...
So Prime Minister Modi will be meeting President Zelensky, and President Zelensky, here we have honoring the memory of children at Martyrologist Exposition in Kyiv. Okay, so that's the location. We are at the Martyrologist Exposition in Kyiv. As we just were, in fact, making out from the visuals, honoring the memory of children at this site, where Prime Minister, after paying floral tributes, meets President Zelensky. Now, also I think it's important to point out here, sir, it's a somber welcome there. And the message again of that war must end.
It's a somber message because they've been going through for 2.5 years one of the most ghastly scenes of targeting the civilians. So that is the reason why there cannot be any jubilation. They can't possibly be celebrating in that sense. But they would like to some kind of a gesture, and which is what the Prime Minister has exactly done short while back, to show solidarity that in this hour of crisis when you are being hit, we are with you in this hour crisis. We sympathize with you, and we will do whatever we can in our power to convey the message to those who are perpetrating this kind of a atrocity.
Professor Swan Singh, as we stay with the visuals, coming to you, sir, what do you think the larger message here? We have both leaders, President Zelensky greeting Prime Minister, and both leaders honoring the memory of the children at the Martyrologist exposition in Kyiv. This is the exposition, in fact, stands as a testimony to recall those who lost their lives in the conflict. Professor Singh. Professor Swan Singh, can you hear us, sir? Okay, we'll try and reconnect with him, sir, but is he there with us?
Yes, I am.
Okay, go ahead, sir. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, thank you. I'm saying the other big message going out from this meeting, as Ambassador Soni will bear me out on this, today is the Independence Day. It's a national day of Ukraine today.
Yes.
The Indian Prime Minister is in Kiev on that very important day of their history.
On the invitation of Ukraine, I think there is a message there as well. That they, reaching out to India.
Absolutely. And in that case, of course, these two leaders have had at least 3 in-person meetings. And after he was elected as president in 2020, Indian Prime Minister has spoken to him on phone many times. So they are not unfamiliar with each other. They know each other very well. And I think the warm hug that you just showed on your screen is clearly a reflection of that mutual bonhomie that the two leaders share. Of course, when President Zelensky was very angry and issued a very, very harsh statement when Indian Prime Minister was in Moscow, it was only expected. I mean, they are at war with Moscow, and if one of the international leader happens to be in Moscow, that kind of statement is bound to come from Zelensky in that sense. That is more to do with keeping morale of his own nation, but he fully understands the kind of gravitas that Indian Prime Minister carries.
Absolutely.
And remember the meeting that Indian Deputy National Security Advisor had with Chief of Staff of President Zelensky. This was already underlined that they believe India can play a very substantial role in the process of ensuring peace in the region, and of course also in reconstruction, which would be an important activity once the war comes to an end, as and when it comes to an end. So I think this warmth that you see between two leaders on your screen was only anticipated because they have met each other many times, they have spoken to each other many times. They also have a general imagination of each other as, fully driven to ensure peace and stability in that region and around the world. So they treat each other with enormous respect, and I think that warmth is visible in their initial meeting on your screen, and I think that sets the tone of the meeting. And I think that set the tone of what will take place in terms of their bilateral closed door or delegation level meetings, and hopefully where it would move forward in coming weeks and months, if it takes that kind of time, in seeing any initiative becoming public in that sense. As you understand, a lot of these things that are happening may not come out in public as of now.
Okay.
And I don't really know. Some of the Western media is also talking about Prime Minister Modi carrying a message from Putin for President Zelensky. I, of course, don't think that is the only reason why Indian Prime Minister is there. Indian Prime Minister is there by his own initiative, by his own weight as an international leader and his own interest. You mentioned Global South. He's the leader of Global South, increasingly recognized around the world. And in this war, Global South is the largest victim. Remember all those shortages of food, fertilizer, fuel, and finance. Global South is the victim of that crisis. And if war here can be brought to an end as soon as possible, I think we will be bringing also great relief to the Global South, not just to the Indians in Ukraine that I mentioned in my first remark, who are already delighted that Indian Prime Minister is there in Kyiv today. But Global South...
Sir, but we cannot lose the sight of the fact that this visit comes on the invitation of President Zelensky, which I wouldn't jump the gun and say is well timed with their Independence Day, but it coincides with their Independence Day. We won't speculate, but the fact of the matter is that India's global standing under the leadership of Prime Minister Modi, which West may not like, but that doesn't change the fact, Ambassador Soni, would you also see this as an indicative of some sort of a nuanced shift in India's diplomatic strategy in terms of reaching out to this part of the Europe as well.
Before I go,
Where what India says, world takes notice.
Before I go to that, let me refer to Professor Swaran Singh's point about the Indian community. It's important for them to be also brought into the focus. You see, Indian community has been always supporting Ukrainian cause. I keep getting messages from them, please try to influence the Ministry of External Affairs to be a bit more considerate. 3 years or so back, Indian community were taking floats on this particular day and they were celebrating along with the Ukrainians. But last 2-3 years, and particularly after the COVID, things have quietened down. So the community's interest is there. But to come back to your point right now, Global South is, I think there's no better leader who's qualified to do that, and it does that by example. At the G20 summit, it was India which was responsible for bringing Africa onto the high table. Similarly, anybody who is considering itself being pushed to the wall, India will always sympathize with them. But in present circumstances, as you can see, we are stuck in a jam. We are not able to, the two parties are not able to come forward for a meeting ground where they can at least start the discussion. So this is where India's role comes in, because everything has been tried, various formulas have been tried. There have been all kind of attempts by the Europeans and by the Turks and by the Chinese, all kind of things. We are not going with them a particular fixed plan, but we are going them to see what are your problems, where are you getting stuck, can we smoothen those ideas, can we please help you in better understanding. I think this is something which has been lacking, and our moral support, moral standard, and by reason of our track record, that is which brings confidence on both sides. And I think Zelensky realized that in the past he has not been as attentive to the India's possible role that it could play, but I think he has been impressed upon, he has seen it through various contacts, that India is the only voice, independent, neutral, which can take a stance which will not be, despite the closeness to Russia, but it will not certainly be supporting them all along. And that's why Russia was being advised by the Prime Minister.
Okay, Professor Swaran Singh, indicative of a nuanced shift in India's diplomatic strategy as far as Europe is concerned. Of late, would you see that?
There is no doubt. I mean, India is no longer the India that India was 20, 30, 40 years earlier. The Soviet Union and later Russia, which was source of defense supplies as much as 70% at some point in time, is today come down to about 47, 46% of India's defense procurements happening from Russia. India has built, much widespread relationship with all other major powers. So in that sense, yes, there has been a constant incremental redefining of India's foreign policy to suit India's new stature and India's changed national security and national interests in general. Look at West Asia. India is friend of everybody there. Egypt, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Israel, Iran, countries that don't talk to each other are all talking to India. So in that sense, there is no, surprise here that Indian Prime Minister goes to Moscow and has a successful visit there. And then he comes and has, another visit to Ukraine as well. That is the sign of India's changing and rising stature. India is expected to become third largest economy much faster than most estimates because of constant devaluation of yen in Japan, recessionary trends in Germany. So if India, is seen as the third largest economy on the planet, then of course India has to redesign how it engages the rest of the world. And it is part of that expanding engagement from non-alignment to multi-alignment to now Vishwamitra kind of formulations that we are hearing from Prime Minister as to how India wants to engage the rest of the world. So it's not that India is today going to Ukraine. You will have many such countries where India may not have engaged at the kind of engagement that India will build now in coming years. So Ukraine is one of those examples where, yes, Indian Prime Minister did not go there before in last 30 plus years, but now is going and is building economic relationship, possibly security relationship. Ukrainians, one after another, their leaders have expressed very serious expectations from Indian Prime Ministers, particularly they have even mentioned specifics where Indian Prime Minister can help Ukraine.
Yes.
example, in recovering bodies so that families can have closure of those soldiers, recovering their prisoners of war, recovering a lot of young and civilian people who are who have moved into the other side, and as they say, they are being forced to fight on behalf of Russia today. So they have lined up list of expectations that they have from Indian Prime Minister, which is clearly an understanding that India is going there on invitation, as you mentioned, on President Zelensky's invitation. Indian Prime Minister is there, but there is also enormous expectations from Ukrainian leadership as to how they think India can really play what they keep saying substantial role in pushing forward, accelerating and taking forward the peace efforts so that an early end of this war can be brought about. So yes, it is part of India's overall changing stature that the strategy of engaging more and more countries is visible. So therefore, obviously, it's not going to be USSR or Russia exclusive relationship. Moscow understands that India today is going to engage with all major powers.
And why not? Yes. Yes, but would you also say that Ukraine has made an attempt multiple times to stay closer to India? I'm talking about post the conflict broke and they have been inviting Indian companies to the war-torn Ukraine to invest. In fact, their foreign minister also paid a visit to New Delhi. So from the Ukrainian side, there has been a constant outreach to India. I mean, diplomatically, yes, G7 happened, but otherwise also.
I think, Sakal, there is no doubt. I fully agree with Ambassador Soni saying that Ukrainians have been very receptive, welcoming of Indian students, of Indian business people, Indian travelers. I have a couple of professors who are teaching in international relations and other disciplines there. They find life very comfortable in Ukraine. But let's talk of the war context. If there were 3 bilaterals, they were not meeting just as part of G7 or COP at Glasgow, climate change summit meeting. These were drawn aside bilaterals that happened between President Zelensky and Indian Prime Minister. That shows that the interest was clearly shown and projected from both sides. And which is again that warmth, as you're seeing on screen, the way President Zelensky and Indian Prime Minister Modi meets, that warmth is very visible, and that comes out of the fact that both think they can have a very complementary relationship. Now, in reconstruction of Ukraine, India definitely can play a very substantial role. And I heard Ambassador Soni say that, Ministry of External Affairs is already thinking on those issues as to how will India contribute after the conflict comes to an end. So yes, the fact that this invitation came for Indian Prime Minister to visit Kiev, and I think for me, the National Day as the date chosen by President Zelensky to invite Indian Prime Minister sends a certain message that they want to showcase that Indian Prime Minister is there on a significant day. But this may not have been the idea on Indian side, but it nevertheless communicates something for the rest of the world, that India stands with freedom, with independence, with peace, and with prosperity of Ukraine. And whatever India can contribute, India will contribute, and India will not be bound by any external structural forces. No US, no Russia, no other country can today dictate how India will pursue its foreign policy. So all these speculations of Indian Prime Minister is in Kiev because of anger shown by Western nations or by Zelensky is absolutely rubbish for me. I think this is a reflection of India's changing stature, which is showcasing India's multi-alignment with as many countries in as many sectors as possible. And this is being increasingly understood by everybody, including by Washington, D.C., Moscow,
Correct.
And leadership in Ukraine as well.
I'm reminded of the Ambassador Soni, Foreign Minister, our External Affairs Minister, Dr. Jaishankar's statement when in the middle of the war, why did India not take sides and so on. There was this attempt by a certain section of Western media to derive or perhaps construct a narrative and misconstrue India's neutrality. But he replied it so aptly, saying that, well, India took its own side. Remember that. So this is India taking its own side, and the side of diplomacy, dialogue, peace.
He also added another thing. This is Europe's war. It's not India's war.
Exactly.
So don't expect us to be partisans.
Yes.
We will, outside, we will do whatever we like. But you want us to become partners, active partners in the fight. It's not India's
India is
war.
walking the talk on that.
Right.
Would you like to add to Professor Singh's point on this shift in India's diplomatic and strategic outreach as far as Europe is concerned now?
Yes, I mean, I
The
think
level of
things-
engagements that we have seen in the last 6-7 months.
things have to change. Ours is a dynamic foreign policy. It's not static.
Correct.
It must move with the time, see what are the new things keep coming. We should not be in the straitjacket of what happened in the 50s and 60s and 70s. India's role is changing. It was in a basket case at one time. Now it's the third largest economy. It's not just receiving, it's how much and what it can give to the outside world, not just to the underdeveloped world, but also what it can contribute in terms of ideas, initiatives and directions which India can give. And this is exactly what Modi's visit is trying to prove, that you have been fighting for the last 2.5 years, you have not come up with anything. Let's try it, give it a shot. There is no guarantee it will succeed, but here is an earnest effort by an impartial body and without any interest in anybody else to see the smoothing of the process.
Correct. Professor Singh, would you like to come in here now? This indicative, again, not only the nuanced approach, but that India is for the multi-alignment and we decide, not you. In the multipolar world with what's happening around, the war theatre.
Absolutely, Sakal. As you mentioned, India has today a very articulate foreign minister, and he's been able to articulate a relatively far more assertive foreign policy narrative in that sense. For example, Ambassador just reminded us of foreign minister having said that, Europeans often think that their problems are everybody's problems. And other problems are not European problems. And a comparison was made. What did Europe do when India had a tension on Galwan in 2020 June?
Absolutely.
Did you step in at that time and stood by India and sort of showed your anger against China? You chose your own national interest. You wanted to engage China. You wanted to engage India as well. So India is doing exactly what suits India's national interest in that sense. And what my feeling is that this is being increasingly understood. And the big sheriffs, the national capitals of great powers, today are increasingly reconciling to the fact that India will stand on its own feet, will follow its own interests. And therefore, it is very natural, Sakal, that any country that emerges as a great power will rub some shoulders. In that sense, some of these countries are going to be, look at the United States. Half the world is angry with the United States. Now, that doesn't decide how US will run its foreign policy. And likewise, as India's stature changes, India will be driven far more by its own understanding of world affairs, how it can best, take forward its own wisdom, its own interests. And yes, that will upset some countries because, we won't be bandwagoning any of these big powers. We keep hearing often, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov is often very angry with India because India is participating in quadrilateral security framework. On the other hand, you see, Blinken getting upset with India on Indian Prime Minister going to Moscow. But this is part of how India's rise will, showcase its unfolding new ideas. President Zelensky, who you saw his statements when Indian Prime Minister went to Moscow, showed very, serious anger against Indian Prime Minister. Being very, very admonishing. Today he's having a sort of warm hug and welcome with Indian Prime Minister. I think there is a certain amount of increasing pragmatism also that is guiding foreign policy. In fact, I teach and I often say most foreign policies are becoming far more transactional today. Nobody is kind of bound by hardcore ideologies or vestiges of past memories and so on. Every country wants to pursue national interest, and India is also increasingly becoming more and more pragmatic, and therefore has a whole lot of relations with France, with Britain, with Germany, with Ukraine, with Russia, and everybody else. And they increasingly understand. NATO is trying to engage India, and there have been voices in NATO that want India to become NATO member.
Yeah.
That is the recognition of India's stature in global affairs. When US wants to start a second Quad in Middle East, they want to bring in UAE, Israel, US, and who? India. So this increasing understanding of India's rising stature, and it suits India to then decide its own course.
Yes.
And there are some costs. There will be some costs as far as the cost benefit analysis favors India, India will continue to pursue its own national interest.
Okay, we will have to take a very short break, gentlemen. Professor Swaran Singh and Ambassador Soni, we will request you to please stay put with us. And before we take a break on this special broadcast, just to remind our viewers who are watching the show in India and from abroad, well, next in line or coming up, we are also staying standby. We're expecting a formal welcome by Ukrainian president, and there's going to be a photo op, leaders photo opportunity or photo op, and signing of the visitors book. We will also be talking about the introduction of the delegates. We remember there is a very, very important delegation level talk that is scheduled. This is something which is going to be coming up next, including the exchange of documents in a while from now. You're watching special broadcast PM Modi in Ukraine. A short break, we'll be back with more.